During a housing crisis, the Liberal Finance Minister is making things worse. The new capital gains tax will kill investments in Canada and drive up the cost for those who provide housing. Rental experts are saying the consequences of this tax hike would be disastrous in the short, medium, and long term, citing concerns for viability of long-term investment. This will lead to less places to rent and more cost to renters. Canadians are already facing the highest average asking rent ever. So how is it fair that the Liberals are putting the brakes on new housing when Canadians can barely afford to rent?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, let's remember that this member is from a party whose leader got 7 affordable units built when he was in charge of housing. Let's remember that their housing plan would actually put more tax on home builders. And let's remember that this is the party that believes in cuts, cuts, cuts. They're going to cut dental care, they're going to cut pharmacare, they're going to cut early learning and child.
The Honourable Member from Kelowna Lake Country.
That member has lost all credibility with Canadians, and a job-killing tax on healthcare, homes, farms, and small businesses is the last thing that Canadians need right now in a cost-of-living crisis. This new tax won't build any homes. It will only discourage investment of purpose-built rentals. Richard Lyle, residential construction expert, said there's not a chance the Liberals will meet their own housing targets. Housing starts are down, and this tax hike will only make it worse. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost. How is it fair that the Liberals are raising taxes when home building starts are down?
It's not fair. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
With all due respect to the member, Mr. Speaker, she talks about credibility. She was in the House of Commons committee meeting responsible for housing when an expert from the rental sector told her that her party's position on not waiving GST for the building of purpose-built rentals was deeply irresponsible. That's a direct quote, Mr. Speaker. On top of that, she voted against her community of Kelowna getting almost $32 million to incent zoning changes that will lead to the building of 20,000 homes over the next 10 years. That's the Conservative Party, Mr. Speaker. They identify problems, but they never offer solutions.
The Honourable Member for Bellechasse-les-Échemins-Lévis. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After 9 years of this Liberal government, rents are getting higher and higher, and affordable housing is becoming scarcer and scarcer. Canadians are distressed by this housing crisis, and now the Prime Minister wants to make things worse by changing capital gains tax. According to the Quebec Corporation of Landlords, this change will push rents higher, which is definitely to be avoided in the current context. Why does the Prime Minister want to raise taxes on housing in the midst of a housing crisis? How is that possible, Mr. Speaker? The Honourable Minister of Economic Development for Quebec. Mr. Speaker, I have good news for my colleague opposite. According to Stats Can, in April, there was a record high number of housing permits, of construction permits in 1 month. 22,600. That's a lot more than 6, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, here on this side of the House, we know that countries with huge inequalities between rich and poor do not fare well. With childcare, the Canada Child Benefit, dental care, affordable housing, among other things, we are there to support those in need. In Canada, we're building a fairer tax system for all generations. Can the minister tell us what our government is doing to strengthen our social safety net for the benefit of all Canadians? The Honourable Minister of Economic Development for Quebec. Mr. Speaker, it makes no sense that a nurse has a higher tax rate than a multimillionaire. But that is the reality right now. We have a duty to ensure tax fairness. By increasing the capital gains tax, we'll be able to build more housing, cover more pharmacare, and strengthen our social safety net. It's clear that the other side has chosen a different camp, the camp of multimillionaires. The Honourable Member for Charlebourg, Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, the Liberals will do anything to look like they're on the side of the middle class. But people aren't fooled after 9 years of inane policies that have deepened inequalities. Now they're going after the dead and the bereaved with the capital gains tax. We're talking about a tax hike on inheritance. Are the Liberals so desperate to make political gains that they're willing to go after the dead and bereaved? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, today is an important day for Canadians because today every member has to make a choice. Each of us has to decide whether we're in favor of fairness, if we think a nurse should pay less tax than a multimillionaire.
No, we don't think $52 billion worth of servicing debt is good. Nobody does.
We have made that choice. But now Canadians can see what the Conservatives think. They're against fairness and in favor of multimillionaires.
I have Deputy Charlebourg.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg, Haute-Saint-Charles. Yeah, Mr. Speaker, we've made our choice, and our choice is to think of seniors who are trying to leave an inheritance to their children. But these Liberal tax measures will be such that taxes will gobble up their inheritance. Can the Minister of Finance explain why people's inheritances will be gobbled up by the Liberal government? The Honourable Government House Leader. In 9 years in this House, and I would even say in the 20 years since the Leader of the Opposition has had a seat in this House, Conservatives have voted how? They voted against tax cuts for the middle class, against the Canada Child Benefit, against, every time, against childcare subsidies, against dental care, against pharmacare. Every time Canadians ask the Conservatives to stand up for them, they stay in their seats, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Simcoe North.
There you have it, Mr. Speaker. Farmers, fishers, families, physicians, all will be impacted by this tax. The government either didn't know this was the case or doesn't care, because had they actually taken the time to ask StatsCan, they might have found out that almost 50% of the people impacted by this tax otherwise make less than $100,000 a year. So why does this government continue to insist on purposely misleading Canadians about who will be impacted by this job-killing tax?
Hear, hear. Hear, hear.
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, the only party trying to mislead Canadians is the Conservatives, because they have been trying to pose as the party of the little guy. But today, they've had to make a choice. It was a hard choice for them. It took them 8 weeks of struggle. But at the end of the day, the Conservatives made the choice they always make. They're voting against fairness.
Voting against your budget.
They're voting in favor of